Hey gang, welcome to the Ash Christine Designs YouTube channel. This is a channel where I primarily share knitting podcasts that talk about my knitwear design process and the projects I'm currently working on and all that fun stuff. If you are a new viewer, thank you so much for checking out the channel, and if you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. If you are a new viewer, I do want to say that this is not an ordinary podcast. This is a standalone video that I am filming to talk about my 2020 yarn stats. Today is January 5th, 2021. Happy New Year, everyone. That wasn't unintentional rhyme. I thought I would take a look back at all the things that I was able to knit last year, as well as just go over a couple of stats with you guys for the whole of 2020. I think when you're in a year's period, it can be easy to be like, oh, I didn't knit enough of this, or I should have knit more of these. But looking back at your stats is a really good way to actually see where you spent your time. Stats are something that I'm kind of obsessed with. I keep track of how many books I read in a year. I keep track of how much words I wrote in a year. And I even keep track of, obviously, my knitting projects and my yarn in a year. So last year in January, I had all intentions to log my stash on Ravelry and keep track of it all year long because I was participating in Kay of the Crazy Sock Ladies, what did she call it? I can't remember what she called it, but Kay of the Crazy Sock Lady had a stash cowl that was basically like use your stash. So in January of last year, I had all intentions to log my whole stash on Ravelry and, focus on weeding it out. That did not end up happening in January of last year, but I am happy to report that January of this year, my whole stash is now on Ravelry. By the way, sorry if the light fluctuates. I do have a window open and the sun's doing that whole behind clouds, outside of clouds thing, so sorry, but there's nothing I can do about that. Anyway, enough chitter chatter and kind of like opening stuff. Let's get into the Yarny stats. First up, in 2020, I finished 56 projects, which is 6 more projects than I finished in 2019. And sadly, that's the only stat I have to compare to 2019 stats because unfortunately I did not keep those stats anywhere. I know that I had X amount of finished socks and everything, which I'm going to get into for 2020 stats. But as far as 2019 goes, I won't have anything to compare it to because I unfortunately didn't save that data. But next year I can look back on this video and compare my 2020 stats to my 2021 stats. Which, let's be honest, I'm hoping that my 2021 totally kicks butt. Of those 56 finished projects in 2020, 10 of those were pairs of socks. Every year I like to try to knit a pair of socks every single month. Last year I didn't manage to do that. I took a break sometime midsummer. I had some design projects that were on the needles that needed to get finished. And so unfortunately I couldn't devote my free time or my spare time to those personal knitting projects, so I actually didn't get another pair of socks finished until I believe it was December that I knit another pair of socks. It was December. I cast on in November for Natalie of Knitting Natty. I cast on for her Sockmas 2020 socks. Anyway, that's not relevant right now. Of those 56 finished projects, 22 were hats. If you know anything about me or if you follow me online, you'll know that a lot of my designs end up being beanies because it's just something that it's very quick to design, it's very easy to knit, and it's something that I just really enjoy doing because it's easy to cast on and knit in the round and everything, but what really makes a good beanie pattern come together, a good beanie design, is the crown shaping. So kind of like having that easy knitting portion where you cast on and you knit the body of the hat is a lot of fun for me to then transition into figuring out the decreases for a hat and get that shaping going. There's nothing that pleases me more than a well-shaped crown. And other things I say. Of those 56 projects, 5 were headbands. In 2020, I released my Juliet headband, followed by the crochet version by any other name. Then I released the baby Capulet pattern, which is the baby version of the Juliet pattern. And then in autumn, I released the Autumn Breeze headband, which is a super fun cabled headband. It's great for wintertime and autumn because it's cabled, so it's super warm. All of these the patterns that I'm mentioning, I will have in the description box below. And we'll get into the patterns that I released this year in just a bit. Moving back to the stats of 2020, of those 56 projects, one of the projects that I knit was a sweater, which is actually a design that's coming out sometime this year. I believe it's March, but don't quote me. I would have to double check on that. It is my Timekeeper sweater, which I will pop a picture right there if I remember to. But that was finished in 2020. That's the only sweater that I knit in 2020, though I did have several casts on. Of those 56 finished projects, 2 of those were blankets. One of which was the Pinwheel scrap blanket that I knit for my mom. I'll pop a picture right there. That is a pattern by Mina Phillip of the Knitting Expat podcast and Knitting Expat Designs. I had that blanket on the go since like 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. So it was such a relief and such a great feeling to finally have it finished and finally able to pass it off to my mom, because it was something that she really liked, because she's really into quilts, and she told me that looked kind of like the knitted version of a quilt, and I totally agree. So really, really happy that I can make that happen for her. The other blanket that I mentioned was a doll blanket that I crocheted out of some leftover velvet yarn that I had from a previous market. Someone had asked me their kid or their nephew wanted a doll blanket for his, toys or something. And I was like, sure, I have some yarn, whatever. And she was like, can it be the velvet? It's like super soft. I was like, fine. And finally, of those 56 projects finished, 10 were miscellaneous. This is kind of a category that I threw together because there wasn't enough of each individual one to talk about them individually. But some of the things that went into the miscellaneous were a couple of fingerless mitts, a couple pairs of fingerless mitts. There was the Rudolph ornament, which I showed off in the most recent podcast, and little things like that. So again, not enough of each category to really talk about them individually, so I just put them all together under miscellaneous, and I will make sure to keep track of the miscellaneous for 2021. Though I do have plans to knit more fingerless mitts and more, individual things like that got lumped into this category, so miscellaneous may drop by a little bit in 2021 because the other ones may get their own category, if that makes any sense. Also in 2020, I released 17 patterns, which is the most patterns to date that I have released in a single year since I started my knitwear design. Of those 17 designs released in 2020, I believe 3 of those were crochet and the rest were knitwear designs. I won't run through everything that I released last year, but it was a lot of things. I released my first sweater pattern this year. It was for a children's sweater. And coming this year is the matching adult sweater. So in March of 2020, I released my All in Good Time cabled child sweater, which I'll pop a picture right there. And coming in March is the Timekeeper sweater, or I've been calling it Timekeeper pullover, but either way, that one's coming in 2021. I believe March, but again, I'd have to double check my calendar. But yeah, last year I released my first sweater pattern, and it was incredible. I was so busy doing everything and finagling the final details that it didn't hit me until the day the pattern released that I was like, this is my first sweater pattern. And it was just incredido. So that was really, really fun to accomplish and kind of check off my design to-do list, kind of like my design goal list, I guess, because I have a lot of goals as far as design the first adult sweater, design the first, children's sweater. So it was really great to be able to check that one off. Also in 2020, I released my first ever shawl pattern, which is the Cornelia Street shawl pattern. I'll pop a picture right there. This was a asymmetrical, kind of go as you want, or knit it as you want, any gauge type of shawl, which is great. It features garter stitch sections, and it features some simple eyelet sections. I believe a little bit of stockinette, but not much. And that was really, really fun to knit. I think I finished that up at the end of last year. Not at the end of last year. I finished that up at the end of 2019 and was able to release it in, I believe, February of 2020. I also released my first blanket pattern. It's a crochet blanket pattern. It is the Baby Season crochet blanket. I'll pop a picture right there. It is just a simple half double crochet blanket with some instructions on a shell border and some color changing instructions as well. And this one was a lot of fun too, because if you know me personally, blankets are something that I'm always working on. It's something that every time I turn around, another blanket whip has surfaced from somewhere. So being able to write up my own blanket pattern and releasing it was an incredible feeling as well, because it was great. And the pattern is called Baby Season, but it is sized from like a crib size and kind of like a car seat size all the way up to a king bed. It is a super simple blanket to work up, and I really, really enjoy it. I'm actually thinking of doing another one this year for someone that is expecting, so that should be fun. That's all the 2020 stats that I have. I would like to talk about some 2021 goals and intentions for this year. So this year, I want to be able to track my yarn stash and be able to see what's coming in and what's going out. Part of that is why I put my entire stash on Ravelry. Ravelry is something that I have put my stash on before and then taken off and then put it back and then taken it off. And then put a few skeins in and not really done it that well. So throughout December, I sat down and put every single skein in there, and I'm working on getting them all photographed. I think I have about half photographed at this point, maybe a little less than half. Either way, I have 173 entries into my Ravelry stash. Those are entries, those are not individual skeins. So a couple of them I do have multiple skeins in order for specific designs. I have a few sweater designs coming up, a few shawl designs coming up that are in the same colorways. So I can't put those, or I didn't put those in as separate entries, but that's okay with me because I'll just track entries rather than skeins of yarn as far as Ravelry goes. I do have another place that I am tracking my yarn, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is going to track the individual skeins coming in and out. So I will see my like actual skein count as well as my entry count kind of like fluctuate throughout the year. So next, I would also like to track my finished projects again, which I do every single year, but it is something that I am planning on tracking in 2021. Next thing that I want to track is the actual yardage used in a project, which I know sounds kind of strange, but I am somebody that will just put the yarn into the project and say like, oh, I used this yarn for this project, but not put the actual amount in there. Like it has to say like, how many skeins did you use? And I either put one skein or I put nothing. And then sometimes I don't end up using that full skein, and it looks like I tracked or I used more in a single project than I actually did. I'm really good about like keeping track of it when it's designing. I will like make sure that I'm absolutely correct when I'm putting it into my patterns, and I'll say like, you need between this and this for your project if you're following this pattern. But as far as personal projects go, or even when I put my design projects on Ravelry as their own projects, I will forget to update the yarn information, and I'll forget to say exactly how much I actually used from a skein, which is something that I want to get better at in 2021. I want to be more accurate with my actual yardage used in a project, because I think that it's really cool at the end of the year to look down and it says, 10,000 yards used across X amount of projects. But it can be like, it's always been kind of a struggle for me, because I look down at that and they're like 10,000 yards used across 20 projects. And it's like, okay, well, I finished 56 this year. So somewhere along the way, I didn't count yardage in a couple of projects. So going forward, I would really, really like to be able to do that more accurately. And I am looking forward to seeing what my number is at the end of 2021. And finally, one of the last things that I want to track in 2021 is participation in knit-alongs. I have a habit of participating in fellow podcasters and fellow designers knit-alongs, and then never actually participating. Like day one, I'll be like, oh, I'm so excited for this. I'm going to use the hashtag on Instagram, pop into the Ravelry thread. Hey, how's it going? Yada, yada, yada. And then after day one, I'm a ghost. I stopped talking about it in the Ravelry group. I stopped talking about it on Instagram, except for like an occasional post that I remember, which is something that I want to get better at in 2021. Obviously, I'm not that concerned about like actually hitting deadlines in these knit-alongs, because a lot of what I do is just participation for the sake of it, just to, be there with other knitters. But if I'm not actually participating, then I'm not actually participating. I know it's redundant, but I would like to stop signing up day one and then just disappearing. So that is a goal for 2021, is to participate more and to actually like stick with knit-alongs, even if I don't meet by the deadline because of other things that are going on, which is totally fine. As long as I'm actually participating, I'm actually talking back and forth with people and getting that community and that connection through these knit-alongs. That's what's important to me. That's kind of all of my intentions for 2021. As far as goals go, I do have some design goals, which I don't want to state the number, but I want to publish more patterns than when I published in 2020. I'm somebody that it's not that I'm like, if I say it, it's not going to come true, because that's not what I believe in. But I just don't want to promise something to myself or to anyone else and not be able to follow through, because I know that life happens. 2020 is a great example of that. So I want to be kind of loose with that goal and just say more patterns than last year. Although I do have a goal in my mind and a goal written down in my intentions journal, which I'll talk about in just a second. So I'm kind of keeping that number loose and open and not stated anywhere, even though I have it in my head and I have it written down somewhere, the actual number that I want to produce for 2021. I'm not somebody that believes in setting resolutions for a new year, because I believe that if you are like at the end of a year or the beginning of a new year, you're like, I resolve to, odds are you're not going to do it, because you put all this pressure on yourself to do it and you're like, day one I have to do this, day two I have to do that. And that's just not a good system for anyone, and especially not for me. I prefer to call what I do goals, because a goal is something that you can plan for. A goal you can break down into easily manageable tasks and steps. So for me, a goal is far more important than a resolution. You can call it whatever you want to. If a resolution works for you and you still have the steps and the plans, that's fine. It's just not something that I use. It's goals for me all the way. So other than those 2021 things that I talked about participating more in CALs and tracking my yarn and all that jazz, there are a few goals that I have outside of knitting. One of the other goals I have is to read 24 books this year. Last year I came close, I read 21, but the year before that I had read 36. So I'm hoping this year is the year that I actually read 24. I swear every time I pick 24 as my number, I never meet that goal. And then if I pick like 12 or 18, I meet that goal immediately, because I don't know. The last thing I want to talk about in this little standalone 2020-2021 video is the knitting journal that I now have. So on New Year's Eve, just before midnight, my knitting friend and I were talking, and I had sent her a journal for Christmas as part of an Advent swap that we did, and she was all telling me how she was going to use that to track her projects in the new year, and that she was super excited. And I told her that I had been toying around with the idea, wasn't entirely sure if I was doing it or not, because I do a lot of my tracking on Ravelry, but I also love the idea of writing it down and kind of keeping it in one place. So we were talking about that, and I was like, I think I am going to track my finished projects in there, because for me, as a designer, there are times when you start a project and it's like, oh, here's a work in progress, log it on Ravelry, whatever, and then you end up ripping it out for some reason. It doesn't work, or it's just it wasn't what you had in mind. So I don't like to put works in progress in anywhere written down, because odds are I'll end up ripping those pages out. And for me, that's a bit of a waste. So I prefer to only log my works in progress on Ravelry until they are complete. And then once they're complete, I will put them in this journal, which is this journal here. I love this journal. I've had this one for years and never used it. So if you can't read it, I don't know how well you can read it on there. It's backwards to me. So it says the best way to get something done is to begin, which has been my mantra for years, because that's what it is for me with goals, is that resolutions are like, I'm going to do this thing, and a goal is like, here's how I'm going to do this thing. That seemed more profound than I meant it to. Anyways, so in here, I will track my projects, my finished projects. I have on the front page, up here, I have works in progress that I have brought into 2021, which is something that I saw Kay of the Crazy Sock Lady podcast talking about, which is actually how it ended up in my journal, because I wasn't actually planning on tracking those. I was going to put them in when I finished, but I didn't even think about putting them at the front of my journal saying, hey, these are what I'm bringing into the new year. But yeah, so these are my WIPs up here at the top, which are the ones I brought into 2021. So I have the name, and then I have the date started, and then over here I have an empty space for the date finished, because I'm hoping to finish all of these in 2021. Big goal, I know. And then at the bottom here, I just have my yarn tracking information. So I have all the months of the year, and then I have the amount that I started with, and then I have what comes in and what comes out during the month, and then what's left total in my stash. So that is kind of what I'm doing with this journal. I'm going to be tracking my yarn. I'm going to be tracking my finished projects and labeling them all in here. And then at the end of the month, I will order some prints of my finished projects, or some pictures, not some prints, sorry. I will order some pictures of my finished projects, and I will put them into each, I'll put them into each little page. So I have a page here that just says January, and so all the projects I finish in January are going to go behind this page. So I'm going to put the first one on the back side and then continue on like so. You all know how a journal works. Anyway, if anyone's curious, this journal is by Studio O. It is a company that I really, really like, and I have bought their projects or their products for years. They sell at a bookstore that's local to me, so I always grab theirs because of a few things. One, they have really nice covers. I don't know what these are called. I believe that they have it on their website, but they're like woven covers. I don't know how well you can see that. But they are like woven covers, so they're really, really nice and really sturdy. So they're like, I don't know if you can tell how thick they are, but they are like thick cardboard covers, but they have like a woven front. So they're really, really sturdy, and I'm not worried about chucking these in a bag or anything or them getting bent. The other thing is they have this unique binding. I can't remember what it's called. It's like I can't remember. I don't bind books, but it's a unique book bind where it's actually open. So I don't know how well you can tell, but those are actually the pages, glued flat. So, and then there are those areas where the book was bound. So it's really easy to open it up and lay it flat, which is something that is super, super important to me in a journal, because I don't want to have to be fighting it to stay open. So for me, a flat open journal is the way to go, which is why all my planners are flat open. So really, really love Studio O's products. I will leave a link to them in the description box as well. I don't know if they're selling this one anymore. I bought this several years ago at this point, and I have a few others of theirs as well for the next couple of years, or maybe, hey, maybe I'll finish this in a single year and have to start a second one. Let's be realistic, that's probably not happening. I'm probably not going to finish enough projects to fill an entire book, which is something else I'll have to decide at the end of this year, because I most likely won't finish enough projects to fill this entire book, and I'll have to decide if I want to continue using the same journal until it's filled, or if I want to use the back half for some project notes or something for 2022. But those are things that I can decide sometime in the future. That's all for this 2020 wrap-up video and 2021 goal video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that it gave you some inspiration to set your own goals or look back at your own 2020 stats. I would love to hear what your stats were in 2020 or what your goals are for 2021. If you leave them in the comments below, I will respond back to you. I think it's really fascinating to hear what other people's goals are and what their stats were from the year prior. It's just, the whole thing's fascinating to me. As I said kind of at the top of this video, stats are a thing for me. I'm kind of a nerd. But yeah, if you want to share your stats or your goals for me, or not for me, if you want to share your goals or your stats in the comments, I will respond back, because I find that whole thing fascinating. Again, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if this is your first video that you've ever seen, consider subscribing so you can see future videos like this and also the future podcast episodes. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys in the next podcast. Take care. Bye.